Hollywood has become pretty predictable in that most film fans can see a stinker coming from a mile away, because even if a bad premise or an iffy cast don't make it clear, that inevitably horrible first trailer surely will. But occasionally a movie everyone assumed would suck actually defies expectations to deliver a genuinely great time. After all, studios often market their films to the lowest common denominator possible for maximum profit, ignoring that the final film is actually smart and well made. These following films all arrived on a tidal wave of indifference, if not outright disdain, from audiences, with basement low expectations from most, only for the end result to range from pretty good to genuinely quite excellent. If nothing else, they're all apt reminders that no matter how easy it might seem to pick a dud, films shouldn't always be judged entirely on the merits or lack thereof of their marketing. I'm Ellie with Whatculture here with 10 movies you were shocked to see didn't totally suck. Number 10, Jamanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Who didn't groan when Sony first announced a new Jamanji? The 1995 adventure classic has an especially fond place in many fans' hearts due to the starring presence of the late Robin Williams, with many simply feeling that a reboot sequel would be nothing short of sacrilege. The trailers didn't really dissuade from this sentiment, yet when Jamanji Welcome to the Jungle finally hit cinemas, it turned out to be an unexpectedly charming adventure flick packed with great performances, especially Jack Black, and fun, knowingly OTT action sequences. More to the point, it found a way to smartly update the Jamanji formula for a new generation while paying sly tribute to Williams' original protagonist Alan Parrish, whose treehouse is featured during the movie, complete with the carving "Alan Parrish was here." There was just so much potential for Jamanji to be a soulless, cynical rehash of the original minus all the charm, but it's clear that everyone involved wanted to tell a story worthy of its predecessor. Ultimately, it not only went over unexpectedly well with critics, scoring 76 on the tomato meter, but fended off huge box office competition from Star Wars: The Last Jedi, grossing a whopping $962.2 million worldwide. Number 9, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Interest was muted at best when a new Planet of the Apes prequel movie was announced, especially once it was confirmed to be starring James Franco, who just seemed like an awkward fit for the material, immediately reminding everyone of Tim Burton's shambolic Mark Wahlberg starring 2001 remake. But the real star of Rise of the Planet of the Apes was actually Andy Serkis, whose performance capture work as ape leader Caesar lent the film an uncommonly authentic dimension with regard to its animal characters. Combined with a strong animal rights message and unexpectedly poignant tone, this allowed Apes to be as much about its characters as its strong set pieces, and even Franco's casting turned out pretty solid in the end. Number 8, John Wick. This might seem ridiculous in 2023, but believe it or not, there was substantial negative buzz surrounding the original John Wick, with many commenting how the trailers made the movie look like a generic direct-to-video schlockfest that somehow slid its way into cinemas. Above all else, it felt like Keanu Reeves, who hadn't had a hit film in quite some time prior to this, was entering the VOD action thriller stage of his career alongside Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. After all, who among us hasn't seen more than their fair share of tiresome movies where a hitman comes out of retirement for one last revenge-fueled mission? The marketing for the first John Wick sadly focused more on selling the premise than showing off the gorgeous fight choreography or Reeves' icy composure, likely because Summit Entertainment had no idea the smash hit they were sitting on. With its beautifully shot action sequences, cracking ensemble cast, and exemplary world building, John Wick went down a treat with critics and audiences alike. Back in 2014, though, it would have surprised nobody if John Wick landed a cool 27% on the tomato meter and sank like a stone at the box office. Number 7, Bumblebee. After suffering through 5 of Michael Bay's Transformers movies, it would have been silly to expect anything other than mediocrity from Bumblebee, even with Michael Bay being transitioned out for director Travis Knight. The series' increasingly bloated and inane entries eroded so much audience goodwill that it was tough to conceive of Bumblebee being better than watchable, and if we're totally honest, it could have easily ended up being just less bad than Bay's films. But Bumblebee wasn't merely the most critically acclaimed Transformers movie by an epic margin, it ended up a genuinely charming, kid-friendly and action-packed blockbuster that put paid to both its human and robotic characters alike. More than that, it also boasted a reverence for Hasbro's IP that the Bayformers films never did, more or less serving as the soft reboot palate cleanser the franchise desperately needed. Number 6, 21 Jump Street. Back in 2012, the prospect of a Channing Tatum starring comedy wasn't quite the alluring prospect it is today, and so this big screen reboot of the hit TV series 21 Jump Street wasn't exactly an easy sell. It didn't help that the trailers played extremely broad and undersold just how smart and self-aware the film actually was. When 21 Jump Street finally hit cinemas worldwide, it became clear that directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller were the perfect choice to give the IP an R-rated update. The real reason the movie works, though, is the impeccable chemistry between Tatum and Jonah Hill, resulting in a genuinely affecting bromance wrapped around the usual undercover cop silliness. Not to ignore its sharp lampooning of high school movie cliches and the redundancy of reboots. The supporting cast is fantastic too, especially Ice Cube and Johnny Depp, who appears in cameo form, capping a film that works so much more than it ever had the right to. Even the sequel, 22 Jump Street, is almost as great. Number 5. Dread. There just weren't many reasons at all to be optimistic about 2012's Dread pre-release. Most fans simply didn't believe that Hollywood would keep a lead actor's face under the helmet for an entire movie, as proved problematic in the 1995 Sylvester Stallone starring version, while the film was otherwise dogged for its kitschy, off-putting Dread 3D title, and also countless worrying stories about director Pete Travis being locked out of the editing room by the studio during post-production. So a huge surprise it was then when Dread wasn't actually a total mess hacked apart by the studio, but instead a thrillingly visceral sci-fi action flick boasting a unique visual style and killer performances from Carl Urban, Olivia Thirlby, and Lena Headey. Hell, even the 3D presentation was rock solid. Yet despite positive reviews, Dread tanked at the box office. Though it sold well on home video and fans have passionately campaigned for a sequel, but that ship has clearly sadly sailed. Number 4. Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. If you can cast your mind back all the way to 2003, the PR hype cycle wasn't working in favour of Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean, a movie that on paper seemed destined for failure. From the astoundingly lame trailers to the fact that it was based on a ride and the general audience disinterest in the pirate genre, there was little expectation that Disney could spin this $140 million production into a one-off hit, let alone a movie empire. But under Gore Verbinski's assured direction, aided by a witty script and fantastic performances, especially from an Oscar-nominated Johnny Depp, Pirates of the Caribbean ended up one of the most successful and acclaimed adventure films of the early 2000s. It of course led to a series of increasingly desperate and lazy sequels, grossing a total of $4.5 billion to date. But the original movie's script came from an actual place of inspiration and creativity, despite its theme park origins implying something altogether more cynical. Number 3. Paddington. As much as everyone loves Paddington Bear, the trailers for the 2014 big screen Paddington movie were simply not good. The infamous first teaser trailer angered many Paddington fans with its emphasis on gross-out gags and extremely broad skewing humour, suggesting that everyone's favourite marmalade-loving bear was basically getting a similar treatment to, say, the Smurfs. But this was absolutely a case of the studio marketing the movie as lazily and thoughtlessly as possible, because the final film was actually far more sweet-natured and artful than the trailers ever implied. The distinct Britishness that was cleaved away in the marketing was proudly abundant in the final film, while the broader jokes accounted for just a small sliver of what the movie had to offer. Paddington's strong critical and commercial success led to a massively improved sequel, which ranked the highest rated film on Rotten Tomatoes, holding a perfect 100% rating. Number 2. Hustlers. Whoever would have expected that Hustlers would literally be an Oscar contender for Jennifer Lopez, rather than, well, the vapid, generic female empowerment heist flick it was marketed as. STX Films knew exactly what they were doing with these trailers though, which sold the film as broadly as possible, focusing on the sex appeal and breezy tone, despite the fact that the final film is actually far smarter than anyone would reasonably expect. Timely but not pandering, and splendidly acted by a killer cast, Hustlers flashes plenty of flesh, but also passes thoughtful commentary on modern-day America and the inherent immortality of capitalism. For a film that could have just been a vanity project for J-Lo, and certainly seemed to be, that's pretty damn remarkable. Number 1. Ouija: Origin of Evil. 2014's Ouija is genuinely one of the worst theatrically released horror movies of the last decade, so naturally expectations were low for the generically titled sequel, Ouija: Origin of Evil, even with capable horror filmmaker Mike Flanagan at the helm. The trailers didn't suggest anything more than a blandly forgettable horror flick, so surprising it was then that the second Ouija turned out to be one of the most improved movie sequels of all time. That's not to say it's great, but it takes the series from atrocious to pretty good, with Flanagan's typically smart, subversive approach to familiar material, giving underrated character actress Elizabeth Reese a fine role to sink her teeth into in the process. Is the world hankering for a Ouija 3? Not really, but given the incredibly low bar this film had to clear, props to Flanagan for actually turning in an effort-filled piece of work.